Hi, I'm Chris Cook from 3M and welcome to 3M Tech Tips. In this episode, we'll be looking at one of the key benefits of using a cold stretch technique when we're working with wrap films. The cold stretch approach involves conforming the wrap film to the curved parts of the vehicle at just normal room temperature and not using a heat gun to apply any additional heating to the film. Now, the benefit of the cold stretch approach is that it means all of the film is at the same temperature so that when we conform it, the stretch in the film will be evenly distributed over the entire surface. If we do use a heat gun, there is a chance that we don't heat the film entirely evenly. And when we conform it, any hot spots in the film will stretch a lot more and we run the risk of overstretching the film in those particular areas. So we can demonstrate this difference by firstly applying some film to a curved surface using heat and then repeating the same application but working the film just at room temperature. So I'm going to use this piece of film to wrap this mirror, and I'm going to do it by firstly anchoring the film along the inner edge and then stretching it out around the curve. I'll do it firstly using some heat to help with the stretch, and then secondly I'll do it without the heat, just with the film at room temperature. Now ideally for this kind of application I would actually use a pre-stretch technique, but for the purposes of this demonstration I'm going to use that anchor and stretch approach. Now because we've got the squares printed on the film, it's going to let us see how the film is stretching around that compound curve. So we can see that using the heat, we've stretched the film around the curve, but you can see quite clearly the distortion in the squares. And that distortion is not even over the entire surface. Some are stretched more than others, and a lot of our grid lines are no longer very straight. So using the heat made it very easy to stretch the film around that curve, but because it's very difficult to heat the film completely evenly over the whole surface, you can see that the grid is showing us that the stretch in the film is also not evenly distributed. There are some parts of the film where the grid and the squares are much more distorted than in others, and that is telling us that in those areas there's a lot more stress in the film. So you can see that at room temperature, we certainly were able to form that film around the curve with a little more effort, but you can also see that our squares are now much more consistent in size, and the black grid lines are also much straighter than they were on the previous attempt. So this is telling us that the stretch in the film is much more evenly distributed over the entire surface of the graphic, and therefore the stress in the film is more evenly distributed, and we're less likely to have those stress concentrations in particular areas that might cause the film to lift or shrink back over its service life. So I think we can really see a clear difference between those two examples. The film that was conformed at room temperature showed nice even stretch over the entire surface, whereas the one where we used the heat gun and we hadn't really heated the film evenly showed a lot more stretch in one particular area. And you could see from that grid that we really had overstretched the film. Now that could lead to some problems once that wrap goes into service. So you can see that there really are some benefits to using that cold stretch approach whenever possible. Now obviously there's going to be some times where you need to use the heat gun to put some additional heat into the film. But what I think we've also learned is that when we do have to use the heat gun, we really need to concentrate on heating that film evenly over the entire surface so that we get nice even stretch in the film. Now I'll also point out that when I talk about cold stretch being at room temperature, I'm talking about room temperatures of say 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. You'll find that if your installation bay is too cold, you're not really going to be able to take advantage of that cold stretch option. Now, as always, we'd love to answer any questions that you have or hear about other topics that you might like us to cover. So please head over to our Facebook page and leave us a comment there. The link is in the description below. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.